Hi, I'm Tim. I am the Tinkering Turtle. Today we got a little bit of a mundane job, but I think it's a good opportunity to learn some basic maintenance on the bicycle. I was out this weekend, we were riding down the bike path and I hit something. I heard the pop and then I heard the tire going so there was a big leak in my rear tire. My rear tire is flat. We were close enough to home, so I just sent my wife home to pick up the truck so I could bring the bike back here and do the maintenance here in the garage. I did have all the stuff with me in my bag on the back of the bike that I could have done the repair on the road, but being as close as we were to the house, I figured it was better to come back here and do the work. Now you may notice I have a brace on my arm. I started a second YouTube channel for golf. I've been away from the game for 20 years and getting back into it this year, I overdid it and I ended up with a little bit of golfer's elbow, a little bit of tendonitis. So I'll be wearing that, and that's one of the reasons I'm not going to use the bike stand. I decided that lifting it up onto the stand was going to be more than I could do with my elbow in the condition it's in. So I'm going to flip the bike upside down and set it on the blocks and then just remove the wheel from there. Now what we're going to go over today is a lot of people don't like removing the brake caliper to do this job. I do tend to do that, so I'm going to show you the step-by-step process I use to remove the rear wheel, take the tire off, replace the tube, put the tire back on, and put the wheel back on the bike. I find it's easier to reinstall the rear wheel if the brake caliper is not on the frame. So it's one less thing you have to line up. So that's just the way I do it. You can probably do it without it, but it does make it a little bit more difficult. If you get a chance, go check out my second channel, Tinkering Turtle Golf, and let's get to work. Okay, the way I do this is I try to put the rear wheel in a spot that when I flip this over, I won't have to slide the bike very much to get the handlebars on the blocks that I have set up. I'm going to hold the brakes, I'm going to flip the bike over and try to set it on the seat and the handlebars. And there we go. Now the rear wheel is where I can access it and get to everything right here. Now I went down to a local bike shop and I picked up this Specialized 20 by 4 inch inner tube. It's a Schrader valve, which most of them are, and is from Specialized. I will put a link in the description if you can't find a local bike shop with a tube. They usually cost $10 to $20 a piece, and I'll put the link in the description in case you need to find it on Amazon. I'm also starting with an adjustable wrench and a couple of tire irons. This will help me remove the bead of the tire from the rim, and of course a set of metric Allen wrenches. Okay, the first thing you do when you're removing the rear wheel off of the bike is you need to unhook the electrical connector that holds or powers the motor. That's the big one that comes across here, and the connector's here just beyond the kickstand. You start by clipping the wire ties off of the frame. Be careful not to nick your wires when you do this. Usually if you have a light touch, you can get them off, no problem. Once you do that, you have the connector here. This is a pretty straightforward connector. It's got some arrows that point straight together, so this connector comes straight apart. You don't twist it, you pull it straight apart. And it comes apart like that, and it's like a 8 or 12 pin Gillette connector. And then the second wire, what that is the tail light. So you won't be messing with that, but you will wire tie that back to the frame when you're done making the adjustment. What you want to look for when you're looking at this before you take it apart is what washers go where on the frame. You'll note that there's a keyed washer that goes on the inside of the frame. Then you've got this locking washer, torque washer, that connects with an Allen wrench and the rear lug nut. So you just want to make note of that before you take it apart and look at both sides so you know how to put it back together when you're reassembling. First thing you want to do is take out the Allen bolt for the torque arm or the torque washer. Make sure as you remove these parts that you're very careful about where you put them so you don't lose them. Set your adjustable wrench to the size of the rear lug nut. And then pull that off. This is the torque washer. It's got a couple of flats that will make it line up with the sides of the axle and the edge grind of the axle, and then the hole that the bolt you just took out came out of. You're going to find a similar situation on this side where you've got the torque washer. That stops the axle from spinning, and then you got to take out the bolt and the lug nut. So you just remove the bolt out of the torque washer. Again, don't forget to look up in here and make note of the washers, the washer configuration, and where the caliper, the caliper guard is, because you're going to need to reverse the process when you put everything back on. So you take the lug nut off, you'll see the derailleur guard comes off, and then the torque arm washer. Now you'll notice I haven't taken off the brake caliper yet. I'm going to try to get the wheel off with the brake caliper on, and I'll even try to put it back on with the wheel caliper or the brake caliper on the bike, just to see how hard it is to do and show you for the purpose of this video. But for now, I've got both the axle nuts off. At this point, it should just slide up out of the slots in the frame, and we're going to see if we can get it to slide right out. Now, one trick with this is you've got flats on the side of your axle. Set your adjustable wrench to the size of the axle and just shake it back and forth a little bit. What that does is if the axle cranked over and was locked into the frame, that will help free it up so you can just slide it up and out. So now you've done that, take the derailleur and you pull this part back so it exposes the slot in the frame. You shouldn't have to ever undo the derailleur. It should just pull back out of the way, and then just give the wheel a good jerk up. And it comes right out of the bike. Now when you set the wheel on the bench, always put the brake caliper up and the wire up so you're not inadvertently pushing that down against your bench and possibly harming it. Try not to ever touch your brake caliper with your hands. You don't want the oils on your fingers to get on the rotor. I said brake caliper, I meant brake rotor, because it can cause squeaks when you're hitting your brakes. That oil from your fingers can cause squeaks. So you don't want to ever touch this or the business side of your brake pads unless you have some sort of nitrile gloves on. Now to get the wheel off, I'm going to want to find a place I can get my wrench in. And I basically put it in like that. And then put the second one in. Once I've got both of them in, I want to hold one in place, slide the other. Some of these are easy, some of these are a real pain in the butt. And I'm probably doing this in a way that makes it harder, but this wheel definitely, or this tire definitely doesn't seem to want to come off very badly. So you just pull it around, keep this one where you started it, and then you should be able to just pull it around once you get it going. And it pops the bead off of that side using this side of the wrench. Now once you've done that, take the bike or the tube, the cap off. Set that someplace you're not going to lose it. And then you got the stem for the old tube. The bead is pulled off on one side. I'm not going to have to pull the tire off of both sides, I don't think. You push the stem back down in the rim. And you should be able to pull the tube out just by lifting the tire on the rim. Be careful not to lose the little keyed washer. That's important to have. So here's the hole. You see it's a little bit of a slit. That's probably repairable. It's away from these seams. So I should be able to mark this, and I'll come back to it and put a vulcanized patch on that. And I'll keep this tube as a backup going forward. So I'm going to set this aside for now and take a look at the tire. Now, one thing that's important in these situations is that you go around the inside of the tire and find if there's anything still protruding through the rubber, so when you put your new tube in there, it doesn't puncture it again. So you just lift this up and look and feel with your hands and see if you can find where the puncture was. Make sure there's no dirt and debris inside the wheel. Okay, I'm not seeing any significant damage inside the tire. So let's put in the new tube. So to start with, you'll take off the cap. It looks like this one has a little bit of a washer there, which I don't normally see, but this is a nice specialized tube, so it's probably a little nicer. Take the nut off. Locate the hole in the rim. And the first thing you want to do before you even put the tube all the way in is get that stem started up through the frame. Not through the frame, through the rim. Okay, now that I've got the stem started through the rim, I'm going to put that little nut back on. And I know this isn't a great way to see it. Make sure it's all the way bottomed out there. And that holds the tube in place as you're putting it in. In addition to the nut I put on, I'm going to put the cap back on just as a second thing so that stem can't go back inside the rim as you're putting in the tube. Now what you're going to want to do is lift up the tire and slide the tube in. Try to make sure, and this is important, don't get a twist in the tube. The last thing you want is a twisted tube inside this tire because that will promote another puncture. So I'm trying to get it as flat as possible and slide it in. And just double check that there are no twists or folds on the tube inside the tire. Try to keep it as flat as you can in there. That way when you put it back together and inflate it, there's no twists or folds, because when you hit bumps with those folds, it has a tendency to pop your tire again. Now once you're happy with the tube in place, and then you're going to want to reverse the process for getting the bead back on the tire. Some of them are pretty tough. This one wasn't horrible. Pretty simple. Now you've got the new tube in there, you've got the tire back on the beads, you're just going to have to inflate the wheel a little bit. So I've got a compressor and a nice pump, so I don't have to use a hand pump. But what I'm going to do is put a little bit of pressure in here, not a lot, And then I'm going to make sure that the beads on the rim are seated both sides and centered, because a lot of times what happens with these fat tires is you can get it lopsided, and then when you're going down the road you're going to get a bounce. So take the time to slowly inflate it, pull on the beads to get, and you'll find a little bit of a flashing line around the tire that you line up with the rim, and that way you won't get a lopsided roll when you get going on the road again. The problem is, if you do get a lopsided tire, you gotta basically let all the air out with pressure off of the tire, so you gotta flip the bike over again and then work the bead till you get it in the right spot, and it's a pain. So it's better to do it on the bench. So I've got maybe a couple pounds in here right now. Not a whole lot. Let's see if I can show you this. Now what you're going to see is there's a little bead right there that should line up just outside the edge of the rim. And you're going to want to push and pull on the rubber until it's in the right place. And you're going to want to do that on both sides of the tire. And you want that to be even all the way around the tire. Carefully set it on the other side and double check this side. Get it in the right place. Once you're happy with it, then finish inflating your tire. Tire pressures on fat tire bikes are typically a max of 30 psi. Conventional wisdom says 20 psi for paved paths, 15 psi for dirt, and if you're going to ride on sand, you want to drop it down to 7. I typically like to run a little higher. I like to run at 25. I've seen some people run at 30. The reason I don't run at 30 is because if you do hit something hard and pop the bead, you can actually puncture your tire by pinching it. So I like 25 psi. And then put the cap back on. Now the nut that went on this one, I've never used those. I've never seen that before, but I just hand tied it down to the rim. The pressure from the tire, the tube, is going to always keep the stem up and out of the frame unless it loses pressure again. So you shouldn't have a big issue. Remember to grab the washer that came off, and let's go put it back on the bike. Now you'll see which side the keyed part of that washer is on this side. When you put this one back on the other side, make sure that it matches that. So the keyed part here is up, the same as it's up on the other side. And I don't know if you can see that, but the keyed side is up on this side and up on this side. And that'll actually be coming up out of the frame with the bike upside down. Now that went down and inside really easy. It fit in the brake caliper on this side. It fit right in the brake caliper on this side. The derailleur, it just worked out perfectly. So that was a very easy reassembly for that part. So the big thing at this point is to make sure that it's bottomed out in the dropouts on the frame. That's the slot that goes into the frame. And use your adjustable wrench, which you set to the width of the axle. And just shake it back and forth and make sure that is down in there really nice. Now when you put these washers back on, you're going to find that you can only put them on one way to line up with that hole. If you do flip it over and put it on, the hole will not line up down here. So it only goes on one way. And then replace the Allen bolt that came out of there. I'm just going to snug that down. I'm going to put on the derailleur guard. The derailleur guard, the derailleur cable goes around it like that. And then I'm going to put the axle nut back on. Once I get the axle nut snugged down, then I will tighten down the torque washer. Again, the torque washer stops that axle from spinning under load. I'm going to tighten up the axle nut as much as I can while it's upside down, and then I'll check it again when I get the bike right side up. Let's repeat the process on the other side. Make sure you get these tightened all the way down. You don't want these coming loose and losing parts as you're riding. But don't over tighten them. You're going for putting a steel part into an aluminum frame, so be careful. Maybe look up the torque settings for this and double check that. Now that I put the wheel on, I want to double check it. Just spin it. Make sure I don't see any wobble side to side or up and down, and it looks pretty nice. Just the wobble in the bike, and the wheel seems to be nice and true. So let's flip it back right side up. All right, I got 3 wire ties. I keep these in the shop for all kinds of different things. Definitely keep them when you got a bike because you're going to use them. The wire to the motor goes up inside the kickstand, and then it's got flat sides on here and on the mating part, and that's where the arrows are. So you're going to want to line up those flat sides and just push that connector back together. Just double check everything here. Make sure you got plenty of slack, because you're going to want to make sure this wire gets pushed all the way together. It's very important that gets put all the way together. You don't want it shorting out inside there and messing it up. So take a little time and make sure that's done properly. And once that's done, slide the wire tie through the frame. There's a frame hole here, and around both the brake light wire and the motor wire. And tighten it down. That keeps the wires away from the wheel. There's another frame hole here that goes around both wires. Make sure the wire ties are nice and tight, and then put another one around just the wires, because there's no frame hole here, but you put it around just the wires to hold them together. Take a second and make sure that both the axle nuts on this side and the far side are tightened back down. And at this point, I'm going to turn on the bike. I'm going to look on the screen for any error codes. There's nothing. I'm going to lift the bike tire up off the ground on the kickstand, hit the throttle, and I'm listening for anything weird as far as sound from the rear wheel and just making sure it works. Everything looks good. Now the last thing I do, I got these wire ties sticking out. I take a pair of wire clippers and I clip the excess off of them just to tidy up the install. And that's the process for removing the rear wheel, putting in a new tube, and putting the rear wheel back on. Everything's lined up. The only thing I have to do at this point is to go out and ride the bike a little bit and check the brakes on the rear brakes. Make sure that those aren't squeaking and they're not rubbing at all. When I lift the bike up and spin the wheel, I don't hear any rubbing, so I'm pretty sure that it's recentered back in those calipers. If for some reason you get rubbing in that brake rotor and caliper, then just simply do an adjustment on that brake. I've showed that in the setup video for the Magicycle Ocelot. If you have any questions, drop a comment below, and I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.